All right, thank you very much. I don't know what I did to score the coveted after lunch position, but I'm obviously doing something right. So we're going to take this time to discuss some updates regarding accountability, both at the state and the federal level. As some of you may remember, back in 2015, then President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And that required some changes to federal accountability and what we assessed in our accountability system as a state. So when we developed our initial federal accountability system, we did it with the intent to have our state and federal accountability systems aligned so we could utilize it for both state and federal purposes. However, after our first year of implementation, we found that we could not get the two laws between the state and federal side to reconcile. So we will inevitably have two accountability systems, one for state purposes and one for federal purposes in the inevitable future. So one thing we did want to note are the changes that you're going to experience to the federal accountability system with the 1819 federal determinations. Last year, we had our first year under the ESSA plan, and we had a federal A through F letter grade. We also had a state A through F letter grade. So what you're going to see in this presentation are some updates regarding both the state accountability and the federal accountability moving forward. So we're going to briefly discuss our state accountability system. For your 1819 accountability determinations, you will continue to have an A through F letter grade issued based off of the three domains of performance, growth, and multiple measures. Specifically for your elementary and middle schools, your A through F letter grade will continue to be based 50% performance, which measures proficiency and participation on the English language arts and math iLearn assessment. And 50% of that A through F grade will be based off of the growth domain, which measures the observed growth of your students on the English language arts and math iLearn assessments. For your high schools, there will be an A through F letter grade issued based off of the domains of performance, growth, and multiple measures. 20% of your grade will be a performance domain, which measures the proficiency and participation on the 10th grade I-STEP assessment. 20% of the A through F grade will be based off of the growth domain, which measures the observed growth in English language arts and math I-STEP. And the third domain of multiple measures will include your graduation rate, which measures your 2018 four-year cohort graduation rate, and it looks at a 5-year improvement for your 2017 cohort. Additionally, the multiple measures domain looks at college and career readiness achievement. College and career readiness achievement will measure how many of your graduates earned either at least 3 transcripted dual credit courses, at least a certified, an approved industry certification, passed an advanced placement exam, or passed an international baccalaureate exam. One note I do want to make on the college and career readiness achievement rate. All 4 of those indicators of college and career readiness are also graduation pathways. However, not all graduation pathways are considered college and career readiness indicators for this accountability metric. So keep that in mind when you get your 1819 determinations. And that kind of leads us to the future of state accountability systems. Excuse me. This past legislative session, House Bill 1002 was revised at the last hour to include a state accountability panel. This panel is charged with studying, studying the state accountability system to align it with the new graduation pathways requirements. Specifically, a recommendation is to be made by the panel to the General Assembly regarding changes to the state accountability system, and 3 requirements that they must look at are an indicator of post-secondary preparation that is aligned to graduation pathways, an on-track indicator that measures student attainment of credits while in high school, and they have to look at an indicator of post-secondary outcomes, which looks at student success after leaving high school. The recommendation is required to be submitted this October. And I would anticipate seeing updates this next legislative session in January regarding state accountability. So the rest of the presentation, I'm going to shift and talk about federal accountability and the changes that you can expect to see with your 1819 federal determinations. When we realized that we were not going to have alignment between our state and federal accountability systems, we at the department looked at what we could do with the federal accountability system to differentiate it from the state system. Through that development, the department established a mission statement of what we thought accountability should be and what an accountability system should do. And that mission statement was for the accountability system to provide accessible data that is actionable and aligned to the policy goals of the state. So we looked at Dr. McCormick's strategic plan for those policy goals to align the accountability system to for federal purposes. So specifically, that strategic plan aims to increase overall literacy proficiency for students in Indiana, increase access to quality STEM opportunities for students, and to increase the number of college and career-ready graduates in Indiana. So as we move forward, I would keep in mind that everything that we did with the federal accountability changes tries to align with the strategic plan and the goals of that strategic plan. The changes that you're going to see with the federal accountability system can really be summed up into three major categories. The first that I'm going to discuss is the general philosophy behind federal accountability. As we mentioned on the previous slide, we outlined what the mission statement was for the federal accountability system, but I did want to note that the general philosophy behind the system is to really look at those goals and measure school performance and state performance toward achievement of those educational outcomes and goals. So everything in our system is aligned or attempts to align with those strategic plan goals, but also all of the indicators that are measured are looking at specific progress goals and performance against those goals. One example of this would be what we've seen in the past in Indiana with our College and Career Readiness Achievement Indicator. We have traditionally measured that against a goal of 25% of our graduates demonstrating college and career readiness, rather than 100% of our graduates demonstrating. So what we've done with our federal system is we've established ambitious yet achievable goals for all of the indicators in the system, and each indicator in the system aligns to that progress goal rather than an ultimate goal of 100%. So keep that in mind as you look at the federal accountability system. The second major change that you're going to note is the rating system that we utilize for federal accountability. Last year, we utilized one of 5 A through F letter grades, similar to what we do on the state side. Moving forward, again, to try to mitigate any conflict or confusion between the state and federal systems, we're shifting to 4 categories that utilize expectation language rather than an A through F letter grade to indicate the school's performance toward achieving those policy goals. Specifically, those 4 categories indicate whether the school has exceeded expectations for the goal, met expectations for the goal, approached expectations for the goal, or did not meet the expectations of the goal. The last major change is concerns what we actually are measuring in the system. Again, going back to that strategic plan, we wanted to ensure that what the federal accountability system aligned to that strategic plan, and we were actually measuring what mattered to the state. So you'll notice that some of the indicators are new, some have merged, and some have been revised in some ways. If we refer back to that mission statement, we'll note that a big component of that is to ensure that schools are provided actionable data, which means that we want to ensure that you can rely on that data, that the accountability system is producing. So that was a major motivating factor for us when we looked at revising the federal accountability system, was to ensure that we had a valid and reliable system that schools could look at and utilize to drive performance and educational outcomes with the accountability system data. So the department contracted with the National Center for Assessment to conduct a standard-setting process similar to what you do with your assessments for our accountability system. So just a quick overview of what that process looks like. The first step is for us to define policy definitions for the accountability system, and these are just concise statements that outline the intended outcomes, interpretations, and implications of each of those four ratings within our system. Those policy definitions are established by the Department of Education to ensure direct alignment with the strategic plan and the policy goals for the state. The second step in the process is to establish school performance level descriptors. These are detailed descriptions of the performance profiles that indicate a school that would fall within one of those four categories that we have within the federal system. To establish these, a committee was created that consisted of stakeholders, including superintendents, principals, teachers, and other school administrators, to really define what these school performance level descriptors, look like. Those school performance level descriptors will then be utilized by our standard setting committee this fall to guide the work with the actual data to establish the thresholds for each of those four accountability categories. So as I mentioned, the standard setting will occur this fall after we receive the iLearn data. ESSA requires, the Every Student Succeeds Act requires that the federal accountability system measure particular indicators. Specifically, the federal accountability system has to include a measure of achievement for all schools. A measure of growth is required for your elementary and middle, but may be included for high school. A measure of graduation rate is required for high schools, and a measure of English language proficiency progress for your English learner students is required. Additionally, there is a requirement that all schools have at least one indicator measured of school quality or student success. So moving forward, the federal accountability system for elementary and middle schools will measure achievement, which looks at proficiency and participation on the English language arts and math iLearn assessment. It will also measure growth for English language arts and math on the iLearn assessment. The English language proficiency progress indicator for English learners will be included. And then there are two indicators of school quality and student success included. Last year, you may have noted that there was an addressing chronic absenteeism indicator for your elementary and middle schools. That indicator will remain. However, we do have one additional indicator for your federal system, and that is the Closing Achievement Gaps indicator, which looks at the growth with a focus on the lowest performing 25% of students at your school on the English language arts and math iLearn assessment. For your high schools, there will be a measure of achievement, which is proficiency and participation on the iStep 10 for English language arts and math. There will be a measure of growth for English language arts and math based off the iStep assessment, a four-year graduation rate indicator for your 2018 cohort, and the English language proficiency progress indicator for English learner students. There are two new indicators of school quality or student success for your high schools, which include the Addressing Chronic Absenteeism indicator, which is currently utilized for your elementary and middle schools. That will now be added for your high schools. And additionally, there is a Strength of Diploma indicator, which measures the percent of your graduates who earn a non-waiver Indiana diploma with a Core 40 designation or higher. Two notes I want to make about the high school accountability determinations for federal purposes. The first, you'll notice that the college and career readiness achievement rate is not incorporated on the high school side for federal purposes. This is because all four of those indicators that have traditionally been utilized for college and career readiness are all going to be graduation pathway requirements, which means they're going to be captured in the graduation rate for the school. So that indicator is essentially merged into your graduation rate calculation. The other note I want to make is in regard to the growth calculation for high schools. Currently, we're able to calculate this because we are on the ISTEP 10. Moving forward, as we transition to the college readiness assessment for high schools, we will have to determine whether or not growth will continue to be able to calculate it, that we will be able to continue to calculate growth after we get that. So growth is an unknown moving forward after we transition away from ISTEP and toward the college readiness assessment. All of the indicators receive one of the 4 ratings, and then each indicator is weighted and aggregated into an overall rating for the school. And for reference, those numbers on the side are the weights of the indicators in the table. So that provides a very high-level summary of the accountability system and what we will be measuring and how it will be measured. The next thing I want to just briefly cover is what those federal accountability determinations are used for. ESSA requires that states identify schools for support and improvement. There are 2 types of support and improvement categories. The first is the comprehensive support and improvement category. There are 3 different ways that a school could be identified for comprehensive support. Last year, if a school was a Title I school that received an F, it was identified for comprehensive support. Now that we are transitioning away from a federal determination based on A through F grades, this criteria has been adjusted. So if you are a Title I school in the lowest achieving 5% of all Title I schools, you will be identified for comprehensive support. In order to exit comprehensive support, the school must either achieve an overall federal rating that falls at the 6th percentile or higher for 2 consecutive years, or achieve an overall federal rating at the 11th percentile or higher for 1 year. The second way a school gets identified for comprehensive support is if it is a public high school with a 4-year graduation rate that is less than 67%. One note I want to make on this, last year, the general diploma and students who earned the general diploma were not allowed to be considered graduates when determining this rate. Moving forward, beginning with this year in the 2018 cohort, your general diploma students will count as graduates. So you may see some fluctuation in your graduation rate based off of that. In order to exit comprehensive support under this identification method, the school has to either achieve a 4-year graduation rate of at least 70% or higher, or achieve a 4-year graduation rate of at least 80% or higher. The last identification method for comprehensive support is for those Title I schools that do not exit additional targeted support within the established timeline. I'm going to get into that on the next slide. One thing to note, we won't see this for a few years because they have to go through the targeted support timeline before they elevate to comprehensive support. Okay, so the second support and improvement category is the targeted support, and there are 2 statuses within the targeted support. The first is your general targeted, which is any school with 1 or more consistently underperforming student groups. A student group is deemed consistently underperforming if it is in the lowest achieving 10% of that student group statewide, and the student group receives an overall rating of does not meet expectations for 2 consecutive years. These will be identified for the first time beginning this year because we had to have 2 years of consecutive data. Schools identified under this first status are monitored by your LEAs directly and do not elevate to comprehensive support if they don't exit. They remain under the purview and monitoring of the local school corporation. The second status under targeted support is additional targeted support. And these were first identified last year. So if you received this identification for any of your schools based off their student group performance, this was the identification that was assigned. These are any schools in which one or more student group is performing at or below the performance of the all students group in the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. So that cut or that threshold we use for that comprehensive support identification is applied at the student group level to get our additional targeted support student groups. These are identified once every 4 years, so we identified last year, so we won't see another group identified for 4 years. These schools are required to develop a plan to improve student outcomes, and any school that does not exit additional targeted support within 4 years that holds Title I status will be elevated to comprehensive support identification. So the Department of Education, Indiana Department of Education, submitted its amendment that outlines these changes to the U.S. Department of Education on February 1st of this year. We heard back from them with feedback in April, and based off of those comments received, we revised our plan, nothing too substantive, mostly just suggestions, and submitted that those changes to the U.S. Department of Education in May for the federal accountability plan. These changes that we've outlined will be implemented with the 2018-2019 federal determinations that are released later this fall. I do want to note that schools and corporations will have the opportunity to audit their data for both state and federal accountability purposes. However, the State Board of Education's appeal process will only apply for the state accountability grades. That same process will not be extended to the federal accountability determinations. The last thing I'm going to cover here before Dr. Flores is going to come up is just something that we've received quite a few questions on already, and that is how we will be able to calculate growth between the I-STEP and the I-LEARN assessments for 18-19. For reference, our accountability systems on both the state and federal side utilize a student growth percentile analysis as the root of the growth calculation. So a student growth percentile is an integer between 1 and 99 that expresses or indicates the student's performance in relation to that student's peer group to indicate how that student performed in relation to those students. So for example, if a student is listed with a student growth percentile or growth score of 60, that means that that student scored better than 60% of the students with similar academic assessment history as that student statewide. So the student growth percentile metric is a relative metric, which means so long as all of the students are taking the same assessment and it's based on the same standards, we can compare the performance of that student to the student group regardless of the assessment that we're using. So this just provides a graphical interpretation of what I just said. So you can see on the left, that is a growth analysis utilizing the same scale, the same assessment from year to year, and we are able to rank those students and determine a percentile rating for a school or for a student. The graph on the right is utilizing the I-STEP scale in comparison to the I-LEARN scale, and you can see we can do the exact same analysis for the student because we are using the relative comparison of the academic group for to determine the growth made by the student. For any questions you might have, which I'm sure there are none, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is on the slide. You can also reach out to us at schoolaccountability@doe.in.gov. I would strongly recommend that folks seek out our Moodle community for resources and information. Given that the phase out of Learning Connection, we will be transitioning to a Moodle community for school accountability and accreditation. And within the next 2 months, there will also be a Moodle course available that provides in-depth information on the federal accountability system and the changes. So if you want to dig in deep and find out how particular indicators will be calculated, that information will be provided in our Moodle course.